Welcome back to our podcast. 12 years after defeating the Sardaukar and Harkonnen forces, Paul Atreides, as the Fremen savior, took his place on the Golden Lion throne. Under his rule, the once barren desert of Arrakis transformed into a vibrant oasis. During this time, the Fremen launched a holy war across the known universe, making Paul the most powerful emperor in history. Although 61 billion people died in this war, Paul's foresight told him that this was not the worst outcome humanity could face. Using his visions and power, Paul tried to steer humanity away from destruction, while various groups secretly plotted complex conspiracies. The remaining forces of House Carino, Bene Gesserit, Spacing Guild, Tleilashu, and Fremen formed a secret rebel alliance. Edric, a navigator from the Spacing Guild, had the ability to counteract Paul's foresight, which meant neither could foresee each other's plans, allowing their conspiracies to continue. The Tleilashu, known for their genetic manipulation, are a secretive religious order residing on the planet Tleilax. Their face dancers can change their appearance and even their gender. They are sexless and cannot reproduce. As Paul had no clear heir, the future of the Atreides Empire appeared unstable. As Paul's control over the empire solidified, Princess Irulan quickly realized she was only his wife in name. Paul's true love was Chani, and his heir would come from their child. Out of jealousy and resentment, Irulan added contraceptives to Chani's food to prevent her from becoming pregnant with Paul's child. Although Paul was aware of Irulan's actions, he did not stop her because he foresaw that the birth of an heir would lead to Chani's death. However, Chani eventually switched to an ancient Fremen diet, rich in spice, which nullified the effects of the contraceptives, and she soon became pregnant with Paul's child. To destroy the Atreides Empire, Edric, as an ambassador of the Spacing Guild, gave Paul an irresistible gift, a resurrected Duncan Idaho, now known as the Gola Height. Duncan Idaho, Paul's teacher and friend, died protecting Paul and Lady Jessica during the Battle of Arrakeen. His body was later taken to Tleilax, where he was resurrected as the Gola Height and trained as a Mentat and Zinsuni philosopher. Height, although missing memories from his past life, still often feels influences from it. Although Gola is often used interchangeably with clone, there are significant differences between them. Clones are usually created from living cells, while Golas are cloned from genes extracted from a deceased body. This type of Gola may regain its original memories. The plan for creating hate was to use psychological means to destroy Paul, and if that failed, to kill him through implanted commands. Complicating matters is Paul's sister, Alia. As she grows, she finds herself attracted to Height. One day, a female body is found on the edge of the city. Alia and Height go to investigate. The deceased is a Fremen woman, about 20 years old, killed by a Tleilaxu poison. Her upper body is almost completely eroded by sand winds, and her identity cannot be confirmed due to missing genetic data. Height realizes the lack of a missing person report might mean the woman was replaced by a Tleilaxu face dancer. 6 weeks later, a medical examination reveals that Chani is weak from long-term use of contraceptives, which could endanger the baby's life. Chani realizes that only Irulan could be responsible and decides to confront her, but Paul stops her. He knows that Irulan has unintentionally prolonged Chani's life because the birth of the child will lead to Chani's death. Paul's loyal warrior Othaim's daughter, Lichna, brings bad news and requests Paul and Chani to visit Othaim. Paul senses that Lichna has been replaced by a face dancer. His foresight is blocked by an unknown force, preventing him from seeing through this face dancer, and killing her could catalyze a dangerous future. Therefore, Paul decides to go alone. The sick Othame tells Paul that some Fremen are plotting to overthrow his rule and points out the location of the rebels' meeting. Othame hands over a Tleilaxu dwarf named Bijaz to Paul, who can remember everyone's faces, names, and details like a machine, and holds records of all the rebels. Paul checks his foresight and realizes that this dwarf is not in his visions. Bijaz has the ability to foresee and is immune to others' foresight, which is why he does not appear in Paul's visions. Reluctantly, Paul accepts Bijaz, realizing this is also part of the Tleilaxu's plan. As Paul's warriors prepare to capture the Fremen rebels, a stone burner is detonated. The powerful blast sends a yellow-brown light streaming into the sky, illuminating the crowd fleeing in chaos, creating a vivid scene. The stone burner is a highly destructive weapon that releases a massive amount of radiation during its explosion. This radiation can dissolve rocks and cause blindness in all living beings nearby. In this explosion, Paul also lost his sight. According to Fremen tradition, those who are blinded must enter the desert alone to survive or perish. But this rule only applies to those who are truly blind. Paul, through his foresight, demonstrated that he could see everything despite not using his eyes. His foresight allowed him to tightly integrate with his visions, sensing every movement and expression around him as he walked and issued commands, calling out the names of his followers and summoning important government officials. The effect of the stone burner completely destroyed the tissues of his eyes, leaving empty sockets. Despite his blindness, Paul's abilities once again showed his extraordinary power. Through his foresight, he sensed the fear and whispers of the people around him. He generously purchased artificial eyes made by the Tleilaxu for all the affected soldiers, but he himself refused to use them. The planner of the event, Paul's high priest Korba, was quickly arrested. Although Korba tried to deny the accusations and convince the Fremen leaders of his innocence, Paul confronted him face to face, exposed his lies, and imprisoned him. During the interrogation of the Tleilaxu dwarf Bijaz, Gola Height learned about the list of Fremen rebels. During Height's creation, Bijaz embedded a program that made Height absolutely obedient to Bijaz's voice. Using this control, Bijaz activated the original consciousness within Height, Duncan, Idaho. Bijaz also implanted a command in Height to assassinate Paul when Chani died. Soon after, Chani died, shortly after giving birth to healthy twins, Leto Atreides II and Gehanima Atreides. The birth of the son was a surprise to Paul, as he had only foreseen a daughter. Like their aunt Aaliyah, the twins unlocked their genetic memories at birth due to their mother's high intake of spice during pregnancy. When Paul received the news of Chani's death, the command implanted in Gola Hate was triggered. Just as the Christ knife was about to stab Paul, Hate regained his own consciousness and urged Paul to run away. Paul insisted on not fleeing, emphasizing that their actions must maintain dignity as it was necessary. These words echoed in Hate's mind, awakening the memories of Duncan, Idaho. This flood of memories integrated into his new consciousness, freeing him from the control imposed by the Tleilaxu. After the new Duncan, Idaho awoke, Paul was not surprised because he had foreseen all of this. The Tleilaxu's plan was to use Paul to reshape the Gola's memories from a past life, a technical challenge they had long struggled to solve. Paul's heart longed for peace, but visions drove him to Chani's side. He chose this outcome from the future timeline, thwarting the enemy's plots and protecting the child. Although he had foreseen only one child, there were surprisingly two in reality. At that moment, Paul wanted to cry, but being completely blind, he couldn't shed tears. He felt a rejection inside him of the future, where Chani was dead. Suddenly, Othaim's daughter Lichna approached Paul, revealing her true identity as the Tleilaxu face dancer, Statale. They had mastered the technology to reshape bodies and awaken memories, achieving a form of immortality through Golas. She threatened the twins with a knife, demanding Paul's abdication in exchange for reviving Chani. However, Paul, seeing through his newborn son's eyes, pulled out his Christ knife from his belt and threw it, killing Statale. Leto Atreides II had inherited Paul's abilities from birth, so he did not appear in Paul's visions. Ultimately, the blind Paul decided to follow tradition and walked alone into the desert. Despite being an emperor, he insisted on ending his life as a true Fremen in the traditional way. The other Fremen began to chant elegies, praying for the man who sacrificed himself in the desert, offering his body's water to Shai Hulud. Duncan Idaho sat quietly on a smooth rock, gazing at the desert, letting his thoughts drift freely. He reminisced about his childhood with Paul and the melodies of minstrel Gurney Halleck that danced in his mind, leading him into happy memories. He imagined Gurney blaming him for the tragedy, recalling the last words Paul said as he left. "Now, I am free." All right, that concludes today's podcast. Thank you for listening. If you liked it, please give a thumbs up and subscribe. I look forward to our next meeting.